17 Black lesbian stars you didn't know about then and now 2026. Behind the Fame Awards and unforgettable performances, some Black stars were also quietly living stories of identity, love, and courage that many fans never knew. From private struggles to groundbreaking coming-out moments, these women changed more than entertainment. Stay with us and subscribe to Hollywood Legends Remembered for more revealing celebrity stories. Wanda Sykes. Wanda Sykes built her career on fearless comedy, but one of the most personal moments of her life happened far from a television studio. In 2008, while speaking at a Las Vegas rally against California's Proposition 8, Sykes publicly came out as a lesbian, explaining that the fight over same-sex marriage had become personal. By then, she had already married her partner, Alex Niedbalski, whom she had met a few years earlier. Sykes later described first noticing Alex on a ferry before the two were introduced through mutual friends. Their relationship remained mostly private, but Sykes gradually became more comfortable speaking openly about the life they had built together. Would you have expected one political moment to bring such a private part of someone's life into public view? In 2009, the couple welcomed twins, Olivia and Lucas. Since coming out, Sykes has continued using her platform to support LGBTQ+ equality while keeping much of her family life protected. Her story stands out because the reveal was not designed as publicity. It came from conviction, love, and a refusal to stay silent when a political fight suddenly affected her own marriage and rights. Raven-Symoné. Raven-Symoné grew up in front of millions of viewers, first on The Cosby Show and later as the star of Disney Channel's That's So Raven. But while audiences watched her become one of television's most recognizable young stars, she kept an important part of her personal life largely out of public view. In 2013, Raven drew attention when she celebrated expanding marriage equality in the United States, writing that she could finally get married. She later spoke more openly about being gay, explaining that growing up in the entertainment industry made her cautious about revealing too much of her private life. Would you have found it difficult to come out publicly after spending most of your childhood being watched by millions of people? Raven's personal life became more visible in June 2020 when she announced that she had married Miranda Pearman Mayday in a small private ceremony. The announcement surprised many longtime fans because Raven had rarely shared details about her relationships. Since then, she has spoken more comfortably about marriage and LGBTQ+ identity while still maintaining clear boundaries around her private life. Her story reflects the pressure that can come with growing up famous and the freedom of eventually deciding when and how to share your true self. Brat. Brat became one of hip-hop's most recognizable female rappers after breaking through in the 1990s with her debut album, Funkdafied. But while her music career placed her in the spotlight, she kept her sexuality and relationships largely private for decades, partly because openly gay artists were far less visible in hip-hop at the time. That changed in 2020, when Brat publicly revealed her relationship with entrepreneur Jessica Judy DuPart. She later explained that she had spent years worrying about how coming out might affect her career and how people around her would react. DuPart, however, gave her the confidence to stop hiding such an important part of her life. Would you have waited so long to come out if you believed telling the truth could threaten everything you had built? Their relationship quickly became one of the most visible Black lesbian love stories in entertainment. On February 22, 2022, Brat and DuPart married in Georgia, turning what had once been a deeply private part of Brat's life into something she openly celebrated. For Brat, coming out was not simply a public announcement. It marked a major personal shift from protecting herself through silence to allowing fans to see a side of her she had hidden throughout most of her career. Samira Wiley. Samira Wiley became widely known as Pussy Washington on Orange is the New Black, but her journey toward living openly happened gradually. Wiley has said she came out to her parents in her early 20s and received their support, yet she was not ready for the entire world to know. Her sexuality was later revealed by a castmate in an interview without her permission, an experience she found deeply upsetting because that choice should have been hers. Would you forgive someone who revealed such a personal part of your life before you were ready to share it yourself? Wiley eventually chose visibility on her own terms. She later spoke proudly about being black gay and a woman, while roles such as Pussy and Moira in The Handmaid's Tale gave her opportunities to bring greater visibility to Black LGBTQ+ women on television. Her personal life also became public through her relationship with Orange is the New Black writer Lauren Morelli. They married in 2017 and welcomed their daughter George in 2021. In January 2026, however, Wiley and Morelli filed for divorce after 9 years of marriage. Their joint statement emphasized that although the marriage was ending, their commitment to co-parenting would continue. Wiley's story ultimately reflects the importance of deciding when, how, and on whose terms a deeply personal identity becomes public. Lena Waithe. Lena Waithe turned one of the most difficult conversations of her life into a television story that changed her career. The actress, writer, and producer became widely known through Master of None, where her character Denise was shaped partly around Waithe's own identity as a black lesbian woman. Her personal coming-out experience later became the foundation for the acclaimed episode Thanksgiving. Waithe has explained that coming out to her mother was the hardest part of the process. She first told her sister, who reacted calmly, before eventually telling her mother during an emotional conversation in a restaurant. Years later, those memories were recreated on screen with Angela Bassett playing Denise's mother. The episode followed Denise across several Thanksgivings as she gradually became more comfortable living openly. Would you be willing to turn one of the most vulnerable moments of your life into a story watched by millions of people? In 2017, Waithe and Aziz Ansari won the Emmy for Outstanding Writing for a Comedy Series for Thanksgiving making Waithe the first black woman to win in that category. The achievement carried meaning beyond an award. Waithe has repeatedly spoken about the importance of Black LGBTQ+ people seeing themselves represented as complicated, ordinary human beings rather than stereotypes. That goal continued through projects including The Chi and her work supporting emerging creators. Her visibility did not simply reveal another side of her private life, it became central to the stories she chose to bring to Hollywood. Brittney Griner. Brittney Griner became one of the most dominant players in women's basketball, but her decision to live openly was as significant as anything she accomplished on the court. Shortly after being selected first overall in the 2013 WNBA draft, Griner publicly acknowledged that she was gay. She later explained that she had already been open with family and friends for years, even while attending Baylor University, where she said players were discouraged from discussing their sexuality publicly. For Griner, speaking openly was never meant to become a publicity stunt. She described herself proudly as a black lesbian woman and said she hoped younger people would see that being honest about who they are does not have to prevent them from succeeding. Would you have felt comfortable speaking so openly at the beginning of a professional career, knowing every word could attract national attention? Griner's personal life eventually became more visible. She married Sherelle Watson, now Cheryl Griner, in 2019. Their relationship was tested dramatically in 2022, when Brittney was detained in Russia for nearly 10 months before being released in a prisoner exchange. Cheryl became a visible voice calling for her return. In July 2024, the couple welcomed their son Bash, beginning another chapter after years of extraordinary public pressure. Griner has since spoken about wanting to remain close to her family and about the importance of being present as a parent. Her story combines elite athletic achievement with a willingness to live openly, even when doing so placed her identity under intense public scrutiny. Kehlani. Kehlani built a career on emotional honesty, but understanding their own sexuality took years to become just as clear. The Grammy-nominated singer had previously described themselves as queer and bisexual, but in 2021 they publicly said they had finally realized they were a lesbian. That shift mattered because Kehlani had already spent years speaking openly about identity and labels that did not always feel complete. In later interviews, Kehlani explained that the realization was not one dramatic moment. It came from recognizing that their attraction to men simply was not there in the way they had once assumed. By 2024, they were speaking about being lesbian with even more certainty, rejecting the idea that identifying as bisexual earlier somehow made their current identity less valid. Would you find it difficult to change the label you had used for years, knowing millions of people were watching? Kehlani's openness has also shaped how they approach family life. They welcomed their daughter Adea Nomi in 2019 and have spoken about raising her in an environment where queer identities are treated as normal. Kehlani has said their daughter is surrounded by queer friends and examples of different kinds of families. What makes Kehlani's story stand out is the freedom to evolve publicly. They did not present identity as something that had to be perfectly understood from the beginning. Instead, they allowed themselves to learn, reconsider, and eventually name what felt true. For younger fans, that honesty has made Kehlani more than a successful R&B artist. It has made them a visible example of how self-understanding can change. Amandla Stenberg. Amandla Stenberg first became widely recognized as Rue in the Hunger Games, but as their career grew, they also became unusually open about the process of understanding their own identity. At 17, Stenberg publicly described themselves as bisexual, speaking candidly about how painful it could be to suppress parts of who they were. Their understanding continued to evolve. In 2016, Stenberg explained that pansexual could also describe their sexuality, while discussions about gender led them to use both gender-neutral and female pronouns at different points. 2 years later, in a 2018 interview conducted by musician King Princess Stenberg, answered the question directly: they were gay. They spoke about realizing that their romantic attraction was centered on women, and about the importance of seeing proud Black gay women represented in culture. Do you think celebrities should be allowed to change the words they use for their identity without having every earlier label questioned? For Stenberg, visibility has also shaped the work they choose. Their career expanded through films including The Hate U Give and Bodies, 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 the latter, giving Stenberg an opportunity to portray an openly queer protagonist while also serving as an executive producer. They later described how freeing it felt to bring their own understanding of queer relationships into the character. What makes Stenberg's story especially relevant is that there was no single perfectly defined coming-out moment. Their public journey unfolded over several years as their understanding of sexuality and gender developed. Instead of hiding that evolution, Stenberg allowed audiences to see it, offering younger Black LGBTQ+ viewers an example of identity as something that can become clearer with time rather than something everyone must understand immediately. Punkie Johnson. Punkie Johnson spent years building her voice in stand-up before reaching comedy's biggest stages. In 2020, she joined Saturday Night Live, becoming the show's first publicly out Black lesbian cast member. For Johnson, that milestone mattered because she had never treated her sexuality as something to hide. She joked openly about being a lesbian before SNL introduced her nationally. Growing up in New Orleans, Johnson learned that comedy could turn uncomfortable truths into something people were willing to hear. Her identity as a Black lesbian became part of that voice, rather than a separate storyline. She later described the entertainment business as a white man's world, saying she faced barriers not only as a Black woman but also as a lesbian. Would you have expected someone who felt so different from the traditional SNL mold to become part of the show's history? Johnson stayed for 4 seasons, moving from featured player to repertory cast member before leaving ahead of season 50 in 2024. She later explained that sketch comedy never felt completely natural to her, and that she often questioned whether she truly belonged there. Her departure was not framed as bitterness. She said she remained grateful and maintained a positive relationship with the show. Her personal life has also changed away from the spotlight. Johnson has spoken about a long relationship with a woman that ended in divorce in 2022. Through those changes, she has continued performing stand-up and speaking openly about queer culture. What makes Punkie Johnson's story memorable is not simply that she is lesbian, but that being fully herself became part of the comedy that carried her onto one of television's most famous stages. Gina Yashere. Gina Yashere built her comedy career by turning uncomfortable parts of her life into material, but speaking publicly about being gay took much longer. Born in London to Nigerian parents, she had already come out to friends and family before moving to the United States. Yet she avoided discussing her sexuality publicly in Britain because she feared being boxed in as a Black Nigerian woman in comedy. Yashere has said part of that hesitation was tied to her mother's reaction. Her mother, a devout Nigerian Christian, initially struggled with the news, and Gina carried some of that shame with her. Over time, however, the relationship changed. Her mother eventually accepted Gina's partner, Nina Rose Fisher, and Yashere began talking more openly about being gay in interviews and stand-up. Would you have found it harder to come out publicly if you knew your family was still struggling to accept that part of you? That experience later shaped Yashere's work on Bob Hart's Abishola, the CBS sitcom. She co-created, executive produced, wrote for, and appeared in as Kemi. When the series introduced a Nigerian lesbian character, Yashere said authenticity mattered because she understood the tension between sexuality, family expectations, and Nigerian culture firsthand. Her love story entered a new chapter in 2026. After more than a decade together, Yashere married Nina in a relaxed beach ceremony in Costa Rica. What once felt too personal to discuss publicly eventually became part of the life she speaks about with humor and confidence. Her journey is about reaching a point where she no longer needed to separate identity from the comedy and stories that made her successful. Sasheer Zamata. Sasheer Zamata spent years making audiences laugh before speaking publicly about a part of herself that she had kept largely private. The comedian and actress first became nationally known when she joined Saturday Night Live in 2014, later building a career through stand-up television and film. But in interviews around 2023 and 2024, Zamata openly described herself as a lesbian, explaining that the realization came later in life, rather than through one dramatic coming-out moment. She has spoken about how becoming more comfortable with her sexuality also changed the way she understood the roles she was playing. Queer characters no longer felt like something separate from her own experience, and she began discussing representation with far more personal meaning. Would you find it difficult to redefine such an important part of yourself after already spending years in the public eye? Zamata's career continued expanding as she became more open. She appeared in shows including Woke and Home Economics, and in 2024 she joined Marvel's Agatha All Along as Jennifer Kale. The series placed her in a cast filled with queer themes and LGBTQ+ performers, giving Zamata another visible role at a time when she was speaking more freely about her identity. What makes her story stand out is how ordinary she has allowed that realization to seem. Zamata has not presented coming out as a publicity stunt or a single life-changing announcement. Instead, she has described sexuality as something she came to understand more clearly with time. For Black women who may not recognize themselves immediately in traditional coming-out stories, that honesty offers a different kind of representation. The idea that there is no deadline for understanding who you are. Golda Rosheuvel. Golda Rosheuvel became internationally recognizable as Queen Charlotte in Bridgerton, but long before the Netflix series made her famous, she had already decided that hiding her sexuality was not an option. Rosheuvel has described herself openly as a gay woman and has spoken with pride about being Black female and lesbian in an industry where those identities have not always been equally visible. Earlier in her career, however, she received very different advice. Rosheuvel recalled that a director once warned her not to come out publicly because it could damage or even ruin her acting career. She rejected that idea, later explaining that she would rather lose a job than pretend to be someone she was not. Would you have been willing to risk your career rather than hide such an important part of who you are? That decision became even more meaningful after Bridgerton turned Rosheuvel into a global star. Playing Queen Charlotte placed a Black, openly lesbian actress at the center of one of Netflix's most successful period dramas, giving her a level of visibility she had once been told could work against her. Rosheuvel has also spoken warmly about her longtime partner, playwright Shireen Moolah. The two met in the early 2010s and have been together for more than a decade, with Rosheuvel crediting communication, vulnerability, and joy as important parts of their relationship. Her story stands out because there was no dramatic public coming-out announcement. Rosheuvel simply chose to live openly, even when people in the industry advised her not to. Years later, the career she was warned she might lose became proof that authenticity and success did not have to be opposites at all. Jasika Nicole. Jasika Nicole became familiar to television audiences as Astrid Farnsworth on Fringe, but long before the series made her recognizable, she was already living openly as a queer woman. Nicole has said that as a teenager growing up biracial in Birmingham, Alabama, she struggled with the idea that she could be both black and gay. Years later, after going on her first date with a woman, she realized that calling herself straight no longer felt honest. Nicole began dating women before Fringe and eventually met Claire J. Savage, who became her partner and later spouse. She has spoken candidly about how race and sexuality shaped their experiences in public, including moments when the couple faced hostile comments simply for being together. Would you find it harder to live openly if you knew that both your race and sexuality could affect how strangers treated you? Rather than separating her identity from her career, Nicole made visibility part of her public life. She has described herself as queer and has said she wants audiences to see Black queer women living happy lives. In 2019, she explained that messages from Black parents of LGBTQ+ children showed her how powerful that representation could be. Her work eventually reflected that commitment more directly. In the 2021 Punkie Brewster revival, Nicole played Lauren, the girlfriend of Sherry Johnson, in a storyline where their relationship was treated as a normal part of family life rather than a special lesson about sexuality. For Nicole, that normalization mattered. Her story is not built around one dramatic coming-out announcement, but around years of choosing to be visible, honest, and unapologetically herself in an industry where Black queer women have had to fight to be seen. Dee Rees. Dee Rees turned one of the most difficult periods of her own life into Pariah, the 2011 film that established her as one of the most important Black lesbian filmmakers of her generation. Rees has said she came out at 27 while living independently in New York, and that her parents initially struggled deeply to accept her sexuality. The experience was not identical to what audiences later saw in Pariah, but it shaped the emotional foundation of the story. Rees remembered feeling caught between expectations of what a lesbian woman was supposed to look or act like. She did not identify with either the strongly masculine or traditionally feminine images she encountered, eventually realizing she did not need to fit either category. Would you have the courage to turn a painful coming-out experience into a film that millions of strangers could eventually see? That personal struggle became part of Alike, the teenage protagonist of Pariah. Rees has described the film as semi-autobiographical while emphasizing that Alike comes out much younger and faces circumstances different from her own. For Rees, a deeper question was not simply whom Alike loved, but how she could live honestly without allowing other people to define her identity. The film became a landmark in Black queer cinema and later entered the Criterion Collection, extending its influence far beyond its original Sundance debut. Rees went on to direct acclaimed projects including Mudbound, proving that openly lesbian storytelling did not confine her career. Instead, the experience that once created conflict within her family became the foundation for work that helped other Black LGBTQ+ viewers see parts of themselves represented on screen with unusual honesty and complexity. Cheryl Dunye. Cheryl Dunye changed queer cinema by making the kind of film she had rarely been able to see herself. A Black lesbian filmmaker, writer, and actor, Dunye had already explored race, sexuality, and identity in experimental shorts before creating The Watermelon Woman, the 1996 feature that became her breakthrough. The film follows a young Black lesbian filmmaker named Cheryl, played by Dunye herself, as she researches a forgotten Black actress from the 1930s while navigating her own relationships. What made the project groundbreaking was not only its subject, but who was behind the camera. The Watermelon Woman is widely recognized as the first feature film directed by a Black lesbian, giving Black queer women a visibility that mainstream cinema had largely denied them. Would you have imagined that one independent film made in the 1990s could become such an important landmark for Black lesbian representation? Dunye's inspiration came partly from frustration. While studying film history, she found that Black actresses from early American cinema were often poorly documented, erased from credits, or trapped in stereotypical roles. Instead of accepting that absence, she built a fictional archive for the Watermelon Woman using staged photographs and invented history to expose how easily Black and queer lives can disappear from the record. The film also triggered political controversy after receiving funding from the National Endowment for the Arts, with critics attacking its sexual content. Dunye did not retreat. She continued making films and television, including Stranger Inside, and remained an influential voice in Black queer cinema. Her importance goes beyond being first. Dunye created a cinematic space in which Black lesbian characters could be funny flawed, romantic intellectual, and fully human. Decades later, The Watermelon Woman remains a landmark because it did more than demand representation. It helped create the history Hollywood had failed to preserve.